All right. Well, I'm going to turn the show over tonight to Mr. Curtis Seebeck, and he's going to talk to us about the wonderful and glorious process of stabilizing wood.
Thank you guys for having me. For those that don't know me, I'm Curtis Seebeck. I am the owner of Turntex LLC and the manufacturer of cactus juice stabilizing resin. That said, I'm going to teach you how to stabilize wood, but I'm not the ShamWow guy, so that's the last time you'll hear me use that word. I'm here to teach you stabilizing, not sell a product. So I just want to make that clear up front. In this demo, we'll talk about the equipment needed for stabilizing. All right, I have to tell a quick story. Number of years ago, about batteries and microphones. This isn't the first time this has happened. Number of years ago, I was demoing at the Utah Woodturning Symposium. And out there, Craft Supplies controls the vendor floor, and they have a stage where they do demos at. And there's one spot at the show that's the coveted spot. It's in the evening after all the regular demos are done and before dinner. It's an hour and a half captive audience. I had 300 people in the crowd, biggest demo I've ever done. All the AV guys were gone. I got up there to do my demo, same thing with a microphone. Nobody's there, nobody has batteries. So what am I gonna do? So I'm like, well, I'll just talk loud. So I holler, there's people like, I can't hear you again. Oh, shit, what am I gonna do now? So I'm like, does anybody in the audience by any chance have some batteries? And I'm up on an elevated stage, and a lady 6 or 8 rows back says, yeah, I think I might have some. She opened up her purse and pulled out this long thing and pulled some batteries out. I'll let your mind guess where it came from, but it's probably too much information, but it was, and it was the best demo I ever did. So, so anyway, let's get on with stabilizing. Sorry if that offended anybody, but just very reminiscent here. So what is stabilizing? Stabilizing is impregnating porous material, in this case with a heat-cured resin. Okay, reasons to stabilize. There's 3 primary reasons to stabilize a piece of material. 1, to make it harder and denser, in the case of punky spalted wood. That's what most people think is the reason. 2 is to make it more resistant to changes in moisture content. Okay. If you're making pens, bowls, anything like that, that's probably not a real concern. If you make bottle stoppers that get put in and out of a fridge, you make kitchen utensils that get washed, you make game calls, if anybody here's a knife maker, that's the primary reason to stabilize, is to reduce cracking and warping because of changes in moisture content. The 3rd reason is to add integral color all the way through the material. Something like this. Camera, oh, you don't have the upper camera on. That color in that blank will go all the way through the material. So that's the third reason why to stabilize a piece of wood. And by the way, I'm very informal in my demos, so if you have a question, just speak up. At the end, I'll answer some questions too, but just interrupt me. Yes, sir. Yeah, let's, if you don't mind, we'll wait. I'll have a segment specifically about coloring towards the, later on, if that's okay. So, okay, so let's talk about the equipment well, first off, stabilizing in this process uses vacuum. Okay, we're going to remove the air from the material. And when I say material, I'm not just saying wood, because everyone thinks of stabilizing for wood. But there's all kinds of other stuff. Anything that's porous and non-oily can be stabilized. For example, I've recently gotten into the lapidary world, working with rocks. Most turquoise you buy today has been stabilized. A lot of people don't think about that. Now, we're not going to get as much resin in as we would with a piece of wood, but it makes a world of difference. So there's all kinds of different things that can be stabilized and benefit from stabilizing. So we primarily use vacuum. We use vacuum to remove the air from the material so that we can displace the air with resin. Okay, think of it like this. If your analogy I use, okay, you've got a sponge. If you just throw that sponge in the water, it'll absorb water. But if you want that sponge to be saturated, what do? You hold it underwater, you squeeze the air out, and you release it. When you release it, now the sponge is saturated. That's kind of what we're doing here. We're removing the air with vacuum so that we can displace it with resin. Okay, so equipment you're going to need is some type of vacuum chamber. There's chambers like this. They make cooking pot style chambers. There's lots of chambers on the market out there. So you need a vacuum chamber of some sort. Word of advice, unless you know what you're doing, don't try to build your own vacuum chamber. Or if you want to build your own chamber, at least contact me and I'll give you the technical advice on how to do it properly. Had a guy a number of years ago thought he was going to build a big vacuum chamber out of a fish aquarium. Yeah, I told him it wouldn't work, but he tried it anyway. He called me back and said, yeah, there's glass everywhere all over his shop. I also myself had the idea to build a big vacuum chamber, 50-gallon drum. They're strong. They get stuff shipped all over the world in drums. So I made a lid for it and hooked it up, started pulling vacuum, got it down to medium vacuum, and all of a sudden, boom, and it looked like an hourglass, and instead of being this tall, it was about half as tall. So vacuum is very powerful. So if you want to build one, know what you're doing or get with someone that does. I have no problem with people building their own as long as it's done safely. Other than a vacuum chamber, you need a vacuum pump. Okay, how many people already have vacuum pumps for their lathe? Okay, most wood turners, I'm a wood turner myself, if you have a vacuum pump for your lathe, it's probably like a gassed pump. It's one of the top brands, American made. If it does not have oil in it, it is not the ideal pump for best stabilizing. Now, for those who are and this is primarily for smaller pieces. I'll talk about how to do bowls and bigger pieces also. That's a different segment here in a second. The gas pumps don't produce a deep enough vacuum. Okay, vacuum for those, how many work with vacuum for their career? Okay, there's some of you guys that know vacuum. Most people don't. It's a foreign concept. Vacuum, in effect, is the reduction of atmospheric pressure. We all have so much atmospheric pressure on us right now. We remove that to zero, and that's as far as you can go. Okay, vacuum is finite. Pressure is infinite. You can get a compressor that'll do 100 psi, 300 psi, 3,000 psi. There's probably a limit somewhere, but vacuum, when you reach full vacuum, you can't go any further. Ideally, for stabilizing, we want the deepest vacuum possible because for our purposes, definition of a perfect vacuum is the removal of all air. The more air you get out of a piece of material, the more resin you get back in. The best type of pump for the money to do that is going to be an oil-filled rotary vane vacuum pump. Okay? For those that aren't familiar with pumps, these are used by HVAC contractors all day, every day. A little tip for you, instead of having to buy new, start looking at the local pawn shops. Being that we have to have air conditioning 366 days a year here in Texas, they're in pawn shops all the time. Now, in the vacuum pump world, you're looking at kind of two price points. You've got your inexpensive pumps. When I say expensive, a couple $100 or less. All of those are going to be Chinese made. Okay. Then you've got your quality pumps like this one, which is a JB Eliminator. This is American made up in Chicago. Everything on this pump is made in Chicago except that motor. Motor's made in Mexico because nobody in the U.S. makes that size motor anymore. The advantage of an American made over a Chinese pump is this pump is fully serviceable. If something happens with a call to someone who knows what they're doing, like myself, I can walk you through putting it back, tearing it apart, putting it back together, and usually you'll have no parts needed. They are expensive though. Brand new, this pump's about $400. Pawn shop, you can probably pick one up for 125 to 150. So I'd rather see you buy a beat up, junky looking JB Eliminator than a brand spanking shiny new Chinese made pump, because they're just that much better. The last piece you'll need is an oven. Okay, I mentioned earlier an oven. There'll be two purposes for the oven. One's drying the material prior to stabilizing, and two, I mentioned it was a heat cured resin. So once you've done with the whole process, you're going to heat it in an oven to actually turn that from a liquid to a solid. And I'll go through all of that more. We're just talking about equipment now. On the beginning part of it is stabilizing itself. This piece of wood, piece of spalted pecans, been in my shop for probably at least 20 years. Is this piece of wood dry? Okay, by woodworking standards it is. It's air dry, it's not going to get any drier. Wood or anything else porous absorbs moisture from the air till it reaches the equilibrium moisture content. Okay, here in Central Texas, that's around 11 to 12%. This piece of wood cannot get drier than 12% without artificial means. That means that by weight, this is 12% water. That's taking up a lot of space that we could be filling with resin. So before we ever stabilize a piece of wood, we're going to take the piece of wood and we're going to put it in an oven. Okay? It goes in an oven at 220 degrees Fahrenheit because you have to be above the boiling point of water to get all of the water out. Ideally, you put this in the oven for a minimum of 24 hours. At the end of 24 hours, you take it out, seal it in an airtight environment while it's still hot. Don't let it cool down. Turn the oven off and let it cool down. It just absorbs moisture right back into it. So seal it in an airtight environment. Doubled up freezer Ziploc bag, Rubbermaid container, something like that so it can't reabsorb moisture. Allow it to cool back to room temperature and then it's ready to stabilize. Okay? There's nothing major to it. And for those who are worried about the wood catching on fire, most people use toaster ovens for their oven. I guess I didn't mention ovens yet. Sorry about that. Most people use toaster ovens. Electric smokers work. I don't recommend you use your household oven because if you're married, you'll probably be sleeping on the couch. So we've all been there, but try not to as much as we can. The question was, once it's dried, do I recommend vacuum sealing it? You certainly can. A lot of people will do that. They have food saver bags. You don't even have to vacuum it necessarily. The tiny little bit of air with moisture that's in there is not going to make a difference. You just want it sealed so that it can't reabsorb moisture. So a lot of times you throw it in one of the vacuum seal bags and just hit the seal function. You can pull a vacuum on it. It doesn't hurt it, but there's no real need to. I usually use doubled up freezer Ziploc bags. How long will it stay dry once you've dried it and sealed it in an environment? The longest I've tested is about a year. I haven't tested longer than that. And when I test, I do everything by weight. So I weigh the material, dry it completely. The technical proper way to dry this wood to 0% is actually based on an ASTM standard. So anybody who's in the scientific community, ASTM makes scientific standards for everything. Believe it or not, there's a standard for drying the wood to 0% moisture content. What the standard says is weigh the wood, place it in an oven at 217 degrees Fahrenheit. I tell people 220 because if I tell you 217 and you're at 218, you're going to think, oh, I got to be at 217 because it sounds too precise. So 220 is close enough. ASTM uses 217 because it's 5 degrees above boiling at sea level. That's the only reason. So lost my train of thought. Oh, so what you do, you dry it at 220 degrees Fahrenheit for 24 hours. At the end of 24 hours, take it out, weigh it again, put it back in the oven for a couple hours, take it out, weigh it again, keep repeating until you get no change in weight, and then that wood is absolutely 0% moisture content. Now, who wants to do that all the time? I sure as heck don't. So in smaller items, 24 hours is usually more than sufficient. If you're doing bigger items, you might want to do that once for the kind of pieces you normally work with. And if you find it's taken 26 hours, just start drying everything for 24 hours. Or do like me, throw it in the oven and leave it for 3 or 4 days. Not a big deal. Now, back to the concern about it catching fire. The flash point of wood is 525 degrees Fahrenheit. We're not going to be anywhere near that. The char point is around 325, depending on the wood, where it can start to smolder but not actually catch fire. The only thing you have to be concerned with if you're using a toaster oven is don't get greedy and stack this wood right up against that top element. Because when those elements are red, glowing red, they're about 900 degrees Fahrenheit. So the temperature gradient from here to here is easily going to hit the 525 and catch that wood on fire. So leave room. Some people put a layer of foil over the top to protect their wood. I've never had a fire. I'm not going to lie and say nobody has because they have. Just take precautions. If you're concerned, put the oven outside. So once we've got our wood completely dry, now it's ready to stabilize. Again, I mentioned earlier stabilizing, we're going to use vacuum to remove the air and then displace it with resin. This little gizmo, something that I use to demonstrate the principle. It's a little plexiglass box I made. It's got a cutout, it's got a hole right here. I'm going to drop it in the chamber. I'm going to weight it down so it doesn't float. And when I demo, I use water. I don't use real resin because, as you'll find out in a minute, the process takes a while, and I know y'all don't want to be here for 8-10 hours. My demo's already about 4 hours long, so no, not really. I'm joking. So you can see, hopefully the camera picks it up well enough. So right in here, you can see that air's trapped. Okay? So that's air that's within your material. Okay? Just soaking it, which for those who only turn big stuff and don't have access to a vacuum chamber, you can just soak your material and get good results. It's not going to be perfectly stabilized like it would if we use vacuum. So smaller material, by all means, run vacuum. So I'm going to turn this on. You're going to watch what happens to that air in that container. Got my water a little bit high there. So you can see, I don't want to suck all that water into my pump, but you can see, hopefully without the bubbles, that there's still the same volume of empty space in there. Okay? Well, I just said we're removing the air. Well, we've removed most of the air. Well, what's in there? Nothing. It's just empty space. Now, we're not a perfect vacuum, so we still a little bit of air in there. When you're stabilizing, vacuum pulls the air out of the material. A lot of people think that vacuum somehow pulls resin into the wood. It does not. Just like this, it pulled the air out. You saw when I first did it, a bunch of air came out of there until it spilled out to where it couldn't come any further. But right now, we're not, we haven't filled that space, we haven't spilled that space with water yet, or resin in the real world. Now watch what happens when I release the vacuum. Now that was just a couple minutes, if that, of vacuum. You can see that thing's now full of water. Because we pulled the air out, created a pressure differential in there. When we released the vacuum, the resin filled it up. So in stabilizing, you pull vacuum. Once you release the vacuum, you let it soak, and that's where the wood fills up with resin, just like it did there. So, correct, yes. The question was, can you reuse the resin that that's still liquid after you're done with the yes, absolutely. I'll talk more about that in a second. So that you can see there how we got the air out and how we got the resin back in. Okay. So these are some spalted pecan. I'm not going to attempt to pour that water back out. I didn't plan well. I should have brought actually, I'm going to have to pour some of it out. Can you go dump some of that out for me? I'll keep talking. I'll find something to talk about. So back to the bowl side of things while they're doing that. If you're primarily a bowl turner or a large item turner, stabilizing is probably not going to help without vacuums, probably not going to help you a lot with wood movement as far as warping is concerned. But I don't know about you, but as a bowl turner myself, if I turn a bowl and it warps a little bit, I don't care. Part of the art makes it look like it's not made in China in a big factory. It will, however, make the wood a lot harder. And that's usually the only reason I'm going to stabilize a large piece of wood is because it's punky, I'm having trouble with it tearing out, that sort of thing, in which case just soaking will do a good job. What I usually recommend if you're just soaking is soak it for a week or two, ideally, to get as much in there as we can. So normally if I was loading this, and again I didn't plan well and bring another container, normally I'd put the blanks in, I'd put that plate in that comes with this type of chamber to keep the material from floating. Then I would pour in my resin until the material is submerged. Okay, I usually like to do an inch or two above. This case, I'm going to go a little higher so that you can see better. Okay, when we're ready to stabilize, we'll put the lid on. Depending on what chamber you get, there's a valve that's open to the atmosphere, and on some of the cooking pot style chambers on Amazon, there's another valve right here. Forget that valve exists. It has no purpose for stabilizing. The reason that valve is there It's because that style of chamber was originally sold before I created the do-it-yourself stabilizing industry. When I came along, the company was making these other chambers, and they thought, hey, this will be good for stabilizing too, and they started marketing it for stabilizing. The original use of the cooking pot style chambers that have a valve here is for extracting the oils out of the buds of a green leafy plant that is not legal in Texas. Okay? In that process, they don't pull as deep of a vacuum because it'll boil off the stuff that you want to keep in there. So you pull it down to a certain level and you close this valve and you hold it. In stabilizing, we need to keep the vacuum pump running the whole time. And I'll explain there in a second. Let me get this started real quick. So you'll start out, if there's a valve here, again, leave it open, forget it's there. You start out with this valve open to atmosphere. You turn on the pump. Pump usually gurgles a little bit, and then it smooths out. I'm going to set this pump down so it's not so noisy. And then you start closing the valve. You can control, initially you get a lot of air coming out, as you see here. You can control how much air is coming out by how fast you close that valve. Now, water does react differently than real resin does. There's more bubbles with water typically. Part of the fact because we're boiling some of the water too under deep vacuum. But you can see, I put too much in there for now, but we're not quite to full vacuum. But you can see how much air is coming out of that wood. Most of the time, first time you ever see this, you're like, no way there's that much air coming out of the material. But it is. That's air coming out of the material. What we're doing here is we're using the laws of simple physics. Okay? Physics say that pressures move from high to low. That vacuum pump is not sucking that air out of the material. Not directly. All the vacuum pump is doing is creating a reduced pressure in the space above the resin. That's all it's doing. Laws of physics take over from there. The air that's in that wood is that atmospherically compressed air, so it's high pressure, relatively speaking. We have low pressure here, so this air is naturally moving through the laws of physics into this space in the chamber above the resin. Okay? Now, a lot of times you'll see, if you read on the internet, social media, about sometimes people, they'll have this valve here and they'll shut it off and they turn off their pump and let it set. That doesn't work for stabilizing. Okay? A lot of people think it does because after about an hour the bubbles stop and they think they're done. And that's the objective, is we're going to run the pump until the bubbles stop. If you turn that valve off, this high pressure air is moving out of the material and it's moving into this space trying to equalize this pressure, because nature always tries to seek equilibrium. When the bubbles stop, the pressure here and the pressure here are the same. If you have the valve closed, you're not at full vacuum, even if the gauge tells you it is, because it's not a fine enough scale on the gauge. So you leave the pump running, so as this high pressure moves into this low pressure space, the pump is continuing to remove that high pressure and keep this as low as possible. So normally we would let this run until the bubbles stop. Now, typically on pen blanks like that, we're probably talking at least 12 hours. Sometimes 18, sometimes 20. There's no way to know for sure. It's whatever the wood wants to do. For those that might be concerned, and these are just questions I get regularly, about leaving that pump running that long. Pumps are made for that. The first time I ever bought a JB pump, I was concerned about leaving it on long too, and I called the manufacturer and said, hey, we're using the pumps a little bit different than your HVAC guys. You know, we might have to let it run for 18 hours. Is it going to burn up the pump? And the guy just laughed at me. He said, in the HVAC world, on big systems, it's not uncommon to run a pump 24 or more hours straight. They're made for it. Now, that pump will get hot. Okay? Typical operating temperature of that pump's 180 to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. Doesn't mean it's going to burn up. In 19 years of doing this, I know of one pump that's ever burned up, and it was a cheap Chinese pump, and it was an electrical failure that caused it to burn up. So, now, unless y'all want to sit here for 12 hours, I doubt you do, we're not going to wait till the bubbles stop. It's just not enough time. But pretending the bubbles have stopped, at that point, the pressure inside the chamber above the resin will be at the same pressure inside the wood. They're in equilibrium. And if you pulled a full and complete vacuum for your elevation, there's virtually no air left in the material. Okay? At that point, once the bubbles have stopped, what I usually recommend is wiggle the chamber around, because you're going to have some air that's trapped underneath. That allows the air to spill free. And then open the valve back up you should, even in this short amount of time, you should see that water level drop. Yeah, it dropped about an eighth, maybe a quarter, but that was what, 5 minutes maybe? Normally it'll drop significantly more. Now, at that point, that initial drop was the initial inrush of resin. However, if it took you 12 to 18 hours to get the air out, air is a lot thinner than stabilizing resin. So the recommendation, once you've released vacuum, is you allow it to soak at least twice as long as you pulled vacuum. Because the stabilizing resin is a lot thicker than air, and it's going back into the material the same way the air came out. So it takes a while for it to reach equilibrium. Once the material, and see it's already dropped a little bit more, you probably can't see it on the camera, and just from experience here and where the level was. Once you've let it soak at least twice as long, then they're ready to take them out, and you put them in the oven to cure, because it's a heat cured resin. Okay? So what you do is you preheat your oven, and I didn't bring an oven with me, so you can pretend there's one sitting here. The proper cure temperature is 190 to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. So what you ideally do, get an oven thermometer. Don't trust the dial on the oven. They are never right, and they will vary from day to day. So get an oven thermometer, throw it in the oven, set the temperature and adjust it until it's stable at 190 to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. When it is, then you would normally reach in, pop that plate out. If I can get my finger under it here. Not enough to make any difference. You'll never see it in this process. Yeah. So you can even see, I mean, these blanks, they're a little bit heavier already, just a little bit of moisture that we've got in it. Which, by the way, anybody that wants these afterwards, they're spalted. As you know, if you know anything about spalting, once you've dried the wood, the spalting process stops. You re-wet it, it'll start spalting again. So if anybody wants these, take them home, throw them in a bag or a plastic bag and let them spalt some more. You're welcome to have them, because they're just going in the... But see, even in this short amount of time, I talked about how it's important to let them soak. I just took them out of there. They're already dry. I mean, out of the chamber, they're already starting to dry. Now, we know water doesn't dry that fast. So you can see, hopefully, the camera. See how it's already starting to get light colored right there from it drying. The water's not drying, it's getting sucked into the material. That's why you have to let it soak. If you take it out too soon, it just sucks air back in and you've accomplished nothing. So once they have, what's that? Yeah, how much color? Yeah, they've already changed. I mean, you can see just compared to what they were when I first took, well, just to give you an example. Oh, here's one that's still in here. The camera may not, y'all can see from there. And that's just the water, and again, that's why you have to let them soak. And that was just a really short vacuum time. Normally, once they've soaked sufficient, they're going to come out and they're going to stay looking like that. Okay, stabilizing resin does not evaporate. There's nothing in it that can evaporate. So the stabilizing resin will stay fluid until you cook it. It is the chemistry. It is impossible for it to cure on its own without some type of catalyst causing a chemical reaction. It's not a drying process. That catalyst is typically heat. Other things can cause it. Oily woods, avoid oily woods like rosewoods, cocobolo. The oils in those can kick off a reaction and cause the whole chamber to cure on you. So it's the best to avoid oily woods. Plus, they're naturally stable on their own anyway. The other thing to keep in mind, I mentioned the cure temperature is 190 to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. That's when it's inside this material. In large bulk quantity, it can cure as low as 85 degrees Fahrenheit. It's not that it will, it's that it can. So periodically I'll get calls from someone, hey, my resin cured in their chamber, why did it cure? First question, how hot's your shop? Second question is, how close was your vacuum pump? I had an email 2 days ago. Guy madder than hell because his brand new resin, first time stabilizing, he sent a picture and it's all solid in his chamber. I replied back, he was trying to blame the product. I replied back and said, okay, how hot's your shop and how close is the vacuum pump? Well, my shop's 69 degrees, but my vacuum pump was 10 inches away from the chamber. Well, duh, you've got a 200 degree heat source 10 inches away from a resin that can cure at 85. There's your problem. So if you are like most of us and don't have an air-conditioned shop and you want to stabilize year-round, get a bucket, container, whatever your chamber will fit in, drop it in there, get it started, fill that thing with water at least to the resin level, throw in a water bottle, frozen water bottle, you can stabilize year-round if you don't have an air-conditioned shop. Any questions thus far? If you have some cure on you and it turns solid, how do you get it out? With lots of headache, lots of work, and lots of prayer. That's usually, no. You can get it out. I mean, chisel it out, drill holes, chisel it, break it up. It's a royal pain in the butt, though. So it's best to avoid it. So then once you've, and the other thing is store your resin where it stays cool. A refrigerator is a perfect place. If you have a shop fridge or something, just make sure if it's your beer fridge, you don't get drunk and drink it on accident. So, pardon? Not that I'm aware of. It hasn't happened, but you know, crazy things happen when you're drunk. I meant to pass these around earlier. This is unstabilized spalted pecan. This is stabilized spalted pecan. It was one piece that I cut in half. And you can feel the difference. You can feel the texture difference. You can feel the weight difference to really get a feel for what stabilizing did for that piece of wood. Yes, sir. Okay. Correct. Right. So his point is a valid point for two reasons. He uses a cooking pot style chamber, which is large. If he's doing these pen blanks, which I don't know if he does pen blanks, but if he's doing these pen blanks, he don't want to throw those in a big old chamber because you got to have a lot of resin to get them covered. So you get any other size container that fits inside. Quart paint mixing cups from Lowe's or Home Depot work. You want to watch your plastics, preferably stay with HDPE recycle code 2. There are some plastics like Gatorade bottles are made out of that I've seen some evidence that they might cause a chemical reaction. So it's best to stay away from them. HDPE is your common milk jug, etc. plastic. You can take that, put that inside your chamber, weight your stuff down, and have less resin. And then in the bad event that it does cure on you, you've only ruined the HDPE container and your blanks instead of the whole chamber. So that's something to consider. And let me back up. I usually have something else talking about vacuum. When we created vacuum, the air in the space above the chamber was virtually no air. We're at the edge of outer space. Okay? If you were to jump in there, you'd explode. Now, if you have kids and you want to have some fun, take a marshmallow, throw it in there, pull a vacuum on it, or grandkids. It'll swell up big time, and when you release the vacuum, it'll shrivel up like Lucky Charms. If you really want to have fun, put a cricket in there. If you really want to have fun, put a kitten in there. No, I'm joking. I'm joking. I'm a cat lover, so. So once they have come out of the resin, what's that? Once they come out of the resin, they're ready to go in the oven. So we've preheated the oven to 190 to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. You're always going to get some bleed out. So some resin that drips out of the wood. That's just part of physics. So get yourself a drip pan. If you buy a new toaster oven, they're going to come with a little pan. What I like to do is, if you want to give me the overhead, is I'll take, and again, I didn't think to bring, I usually use like little pieces of bamboo skewers or 1/4 inch thick strips of wood, and I'll run a strip here and a strip here, and then pretending those are small, and then I set the blanks up on it on the ends. Okay? That simply allows any bleed out a place to drip away. Instead of, if they're just sitting down in the pan, you're going to have a massive, and you can break them apart. The one thing you don't want to do is stack your wood on top of each other. You will end up with a nice solid chunk of stabilized wood that you cannot get apart. I figured that out the hard way. I took a piece like this, I threw it on the concrete floor and could not break it apart. It's very strong once it's cured. Pardon? Yeah. Yeah. So if you're doing the other tip that my original directions called for wrapping the blanks in foil, which isn't necessary unless you're doing a lot of blanks in the oven at one time. The reason I did it is I was doing 20 or 30 pen blanks at a time in a small oven. In that case, wrap each blank in a piece of foil, then you can dead stack them and they won't stick together. But if you have room, leave a little bit of space between them, use that drip pan, then they won't glue together and you'll be fine. So you've preheated the oven to 190 to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. Throw that whole tray in the oven. Don't touch the temperature again. It's going to drop because you put cold material in the oven, but so what? It's going to catch back up. Leave them in there until the resin has cured. Now people ask me, how long does that take? It takes however long it takes for the resin to cure. That's not a smart aleck reply, but the problem, the issue is the way the chemistry works. Once the entire mass, this piece of wood, reaches the required temperature through and through, a chemical reaction occurs, and it takes about 3 minutes to turn from a liquid to a solid. There is no such thing as a partially cured blank. It's an all or nothing thing. It's either going to be liquid or it's going to be solid. There is no in between. There's no sticky blanks, anything like that, unless there's a contamination issue of some kind, oily woods, that sort of thing. So you leave the blanks in. You're always going to get a little bit of bleed out. Open the oven. Usually what I recommend, pen blank size, throw them in the oven, leave them for an hour. Come back in an hour, open the oven, look and see if you see any cured resin. If you see some cured resin on the end of the blanks or in the drip pan below, you're done. Again, there's no partial cure. Kind of like epoxy. If you've ever worked with epoxy, you mix A and B epoxy, you've mixed it properly. Once it goes off, it goes off. You can't stop it, and you're never going to have some epoxy that's sticky and some that's not unless you mixed it wrong. Same thing happens with the stabilizing resin. So it's an all or nothing process. So leave them, once you see that cured resin, take them out, let them cool down, and they're ready to use.
So when you say it's all or nothing, if the temperature inside the pen blank is 5 degrees less than where it needs to be, is it the outside stuff?
It won't cure. The question is, if the temperature is not right in the center, why won't it cure on the outside, not the inside? It can't do it. It's a self-feeding exothermic reaction. Okay. Once the reaction begins, what happens is with stabilizing resin, there's a separate bottle of activator that you mix in. I didn't bring it because, again, this isn't an advertisement. That was what makes it heat sensitive. That is a source of free radicals that become excited by elevated temperature. As it heats up, it excites some of the atoms in that activator. That bombards a molecule chain and completes a link. It gives off a little bit of heat, which causes further reaction, and it gets to a runaway point where you can't stop it. And so the actual temperature required to kick off that reaction is about 178 degrees Fahrenheit. That's why we shoot for 190 to 200.
So I'm guessing, so my question to try to clarify for my brain is, if the outside is that required temperature, the inside isn't, you're saying that the outside is not going to cure until the inside is cured.
Correct. The outside will not cure until all of the mass reaches the required temperature. There's not enough energy there. Yes, it will start a chemical reaction on the very molecular scale, but not enough to create the complete cross-linking to polymerize the resin. But once enough chain reaction has built up, then it's a self-feeding exothermic reaction that you can't stop.
So it's either pregnant or it's not.
Pardon?
It's either pregnant or it's not.
Correct. It's either pregnant or it's not. There's no in between. Yes, sir.
You mentioned the oven in the house. I did that once. It's not going to run you out of the house, but it's very unpleasant.
That is correct. It does. There is stabilizing resin is not toxic. It's not a hazardous chemical. It's not flammable. Doesn't mean it won't burn, but it is not flammable. Which, by the way, that's why you use the drip pan, because anything that's non-flammable can burn given enough temperature, enough heat. If that resin drips on that 900 degree element, it's going to catch fire. It's not going to sustain fire. As soon as it burns up, it's gone. But you try to avoid that aspect of it. There's very little smell of the resin during the vacuum process, but during the cure process, there is a smell. Okay, it gives off the byproduct of the polymerization process is primarily nitrogen. There's some other stuff, but it's not hazardous, but it does have a smell and it is irritating to some people. So cure it in a well-ventilated environment, large enough shop, it's not a big deal. Once those blanks have cured, like I said, they're done. You take them out, cool them down, they're ready to use. Same applies if you're doing large items like bowls. First off, you got to have an oven big enough to cure the blanks in. But soak the blanks, I usually recommend 2 weeks, throw them in a container that's big enough to hold the material, throw a rock or a brick in so it won't float, submerge it in resin, let it soak for 2 weeks, take it out, throw it in the oven and cure it. Now you've got a hard piece of wood. It's not perfectly stabilized from a wood movement standpoint, but again, it's going to be harder than woodpecker lips. So then moving on to coloring and other possibilities, okay? There are dyes made for stabilizing resin. They mix into the stabilizing resin, become part of the resin, and you do the vacuum process as if it was clear resin. That's if you want one color. So if you want this blank to be blue, mix in blue with your stabilizing resin, run the full process. When you're done, the blank will be blue. Now, tip on that is use way more dye than you think. I get people all the time that'll call me, I dyed some resin, I stabilized the wood, it was a beautiful blue, but after I cut the blanks open, there was no blue inside. How come it didn't penetrate? Well, it did, because wherever my blanks were twice as heavy, but it didn't penetrate. Yeah, it did. You just used so little color that it didn't change the color of the wood. Because you're never physically changing the color of the wood, you're adding to it. Okay? So you're filling in that empty spot among all those white, if this was maple. So it's always going to be lighter in the finished product than it was what you mixed it. So if I want a good rich blue, I'm going to put enough dye in to where the resin looks black. Okay? You can go up to 4 ounces of dye per gallon of resin before you start running into potential overloading issues. So now that's for a single dye. You just want to add one color. Now, let's say you want to do this blank right here. I'll just hold it up. Everyone can see from back there. You can see it's got blue and red in it. Yeah. The way you do that is you take a blank, you get it good and dry first, cooled back to room temperature. You think in terms of highlight versus primary. This blank is primarily blue with red highlights. So I'm going to mix up some red dyed resin, take this very well dried blank, and I'm just going to throw it in that container and let it soak. No vacuum, no nothing. I'm just letting it soak. How long to let it soak is purely a wild guessing game until you get some feel, but even then it's going to surprise you. Once you think it's soaked long enough, spalted punky wood, probably 20-30 minutes. Hard piece of wood like this, which customer did this, I'm not sure what the species is. A harder piece of wood like this, probably 24 hours. So you soak it in the highlight color. Once you think it's soaked long enough, you take it out, put it in the oven, and cure it. Very important step. Once it's cured, cool it back down to room temperature in a sealed environment, then put it in your vacuum chamber. In this case, red was used as the highlight color, blue was the primary color. Always vacuum the primary color. Highlight color is done with just soaking. What happens is, well, for one, when you get into multi-dyeing, there's 3 most important factors to multi-dyeing. Number 1 is wood selection. Number 2 is wood selection. And I bet you can't guess what number 3 is. It's all about wood selection. Okay? In other words, you're not going to take a hard piece of straight grain maple and turn it into this. It's not going to happen. You're looking for wood with varying grains and varying densities. Hard spots, soft spots, burls that have multiple different densities in the wood. What happens, that first color soaks in through natural capillary action, kind of like if we're just doing the bowl. It's going to soak in varying concentrations depending on the density of the wood, how much it can absorb. When you throw that in the oven and cure it, that color becomes impervious. Now when you pull vacuum, it gets the color into all the rest of the resin. I have another blank that I thought I brought, but I couldn't get it, that has, you look at it and I ask everybody, how many colors of dye do you think we used? Most people say 5 or 6. It's only got 2 colors. What happened in it, it's a pink and blue blank. The pink went in various different levels of saturation. So you've got areas in the wood that are solid pink, where the wood became mostly saturated. You got areas that only partially saturated, so the cup was half full, so to speak. And then you've got your blues. So in this blank, you'll have some purples. That's where the cup was half full. It wasn't fully saturated. We cured it, but now we pulled blue in around it. Just like when you look on a computer screen and you see purple, there's no purple pixel. It's a blue and red pixel lit up next to each other. So under a microscope, that purple section is a little blue resin, a little bit of red resin right next to each other that appears purple. That blank has some cream color in it. That was where the wood was so dense it didn't absorb any color or any stabilizing resin. That blank has some green in it. Well, I only used blue and pink. How did it get green? Because it was dense enough it didn't absorb any red, but it was the yellow portion of the wood. Yellow and blue gives you green. I used to have 3 blanks that I carried around, pen blanks that I carried around to demonstrate that until I passed them around and they never got back to me. Somebody decided they wanted them for pens. One was a very light blue, one was a nice dark blue, and one was green. They were all done in the chamber at the same time. The light blue one was a piece of hackberry that wasn't very punky, so it didn't absorb much blue color. The white from the wood, it absorbed less stabilizing resin because it was denser. Remember, we can only fill the empty space in the wood. It was a dense piece of wood, so we didn't get a lot of color in. White and blue gives you light blue. Okay? The one that was dark blue was a really punky piece of wood that absorbed a lot of that blue color. The one that was green was a piece of Texas elm that has a yellow tone to it. Yellow and blue gives you green. Again, you're never changing the color of the wood, you're adding to it. So keep that in mind with dyeing. Yes, sir.
Something like a box elder that's got red in it already, will it stabilize that?
The question is whether you can maintain the color of the box elder by stabilizing. I think that was the gist of your question. Most of the time, the red and box elder eventually turns brown, if I remember correctly. I don't use much of it because I only work with Texas wood. That's a UV process. It's not and there is nothing in stabilizing resin to block UV. So it will help with it, but it won't totally eliminate it. Can you add a UV blocker? No, because there is no true liquid UV blocker. A lot of people think there is. I've researched the heck out of it. Even finishes that you have that are UV blockers, they've got something in it, but they're little microparticles that create basically umbrellas over the wood that keeps it from the UV from damaging the material. And that stuff will not penetrate. So just like the dye, there's only certain dyes that work for stabilizing because most of the things you use as dyes are not technically dyes. They are what they call a pigment dispersion. They're pigments suspended in a liquid. The dyes that are recommended are 100% true liquid. The color is actually made at the chromophore level. The company that makes them has a patent on the process. Those are 100% truly liquid, and they will penetrate. Like, for example, I've had people try to use alumilite. Alumilite dye is one that penetrates, mixes and penetrates because it's the right kind of resin. There's also one that a certain company about 30 miles north of here sells. But it's in a sales pitch, so that's made specifically for it. Alumilite also makes a fluorescent green dye. I've had customers think, "Hey, I'm going to make a fluorescent green blank." Well, if you think about it, there's no such color as fluorescent green. It's an effect. That dye has particles in it. You'll finish the blank. The outside will be beautiful fluorescent green. You cut into it, and there's absolutely no color inside because it's particles. Those particles won't penetrate the wood. The wood filters them out and leaves them on the surface. Yes, sir. Good question. The question was basically the turnability of stabilized wood. It's not going to turn with long ribbons like a green piece of wood will. It's not going to be chippy like your acrylic. It actually turns extremely well and finishes and machines extremely well. But typically the stuff that comes off is finer particles, almost like a sandy dust, so to speak. So it typically does not come off in ribbons. Any turning tool works fine with it. And it does not I mean, yes, makes it a much denser product. It really doesn't dull edges that much more. Maybe a little bit, but I haven't really seen any difference in dulling of your tools. So again, once you're done, pour your excess resin off. Wait for them. Once you're done, pour your excess resin off into another container. Word of advice, do not pour it back into the jug if there's fresh resin in here. It's bad chemical hygiene to ever mix used stuff with new stuff. I've seen it happen. Had a customer contact me, wondering what's wrong with his resin. It won't cure. He put it in the oven. He even increased the temperature, and it never would cure. Of course, I start panicking. I start testing. So I don't know what it is. I sent him some new resin. He calls me the next day, and he says, I know what happened. He said, last night we had a power outage. Well, with a vacuum pump full of oil, if the power goes out, the vacuum in here will start sucking back through the pump, and it pulls the oil out of the pump. And he figured this out because the next day he went to stabilize, and his chamber didn't have any oil in it. I mean, not his chamber, his pump didn't have any oil in it. The other thing he put two and two together, which he didn't think of at the time, is what had happened is he poured it all back into the jug. There was let's say he used half of this jug. He poured all that used stuff back in here. Well, when he was done, his level was about the same, and he couldn't figure out why because he knew the wood had absorbed resin. It's all the extra oil. Well, when he poured that resin into the jug, it just contaminated the whole jug and ruined all of it. So keep it separate. Again, quart paint mixing cups from Lowe's or Home Depot with the plastic snap-on lids. They work wonderful because they're easy to pour into. They're easy to mix the dye into. I've got containers of all different colors and different resins all over the place. Then the next time you get ready to stabilize, put your wood in your chamber, fill it up with that resin first, and then top it off with your fresh stuff as needed to get the level that you need. That way you're not cross-contaminating your resin. Okay? Yes, sir. The question is what's the shelf life? It's guaranteed for at least 1 year once you've added the activator. But the best practice is when you mix it, write the date on the bottle. If you haven't used it in a year, get yourself a cheap shot glass. I call them my redneck beakers from Walmart or wherever. Fill it with an ounce of resin, put it in your oven at 190 to 200 degrees Fahrenheit for an hour. If it turns solid, even if it's 5 years old, so what? It's good to use. Because what happens when it reaches its shelf life, it gets to where it will no longer cure. If you haven't mixed the activator, it's at least 3 years. That's what it's guaranteed for. Now, if you have some, you test it. It's more than a year old, you test it and it stays liquid, don't throw it away. If you've got at least a half gallon left, contact the manufacturer and you can buy another bottle of activator, dump it in, shake it up, and it's good for another year. It's the activator that eventually dissipates or becomes ineffective. The question is, do you have to activate the whole gallon? Absolutely. Because the activator is a paste-like material. It's not a liquid, and there's no way, absent some crazy method of accurately dispensing the proper amount for the half a gallon. So the best thing is mix the whole thing. Don't worry about the shelf life. Again, it can easily be reactivated. The cost to do so is just the cost of the material itself. It's cheap to reactivate it if you need to. So, pardon? It is a methacrylate ester blend, so it's an acrylic resin. Yes, sorry. So once it's cured, it's very similar to plexiglass. Now, a question that somebody asked me out here is it food safe? You asked me that. As the manufacturer cannot claim that it's food safe because in order to do so, it would have to be tested. If it was tested and proven to be food safe, that would mean that the pure resin by itself is food safe. Does not mean that your stabilized maple is food safe, or your stabilized pecan is food safe, or your stabilized box elder burl is food safe. At $3,000 a test, you can see where that would be ridiculously expensive to test every one of those materials to prove they're food safe. So I can tell you that similar chemistry is if you have a brass water meter, and most brass water meters are made with powdered metallurgy. They take powdered brass, put it in a mold, and it gets heated and it solidifies, sintered. Powdered metallurgy is porous. Every brass water meter that has powdered metallurgy has been impregnated with a similar chemistry, and it is NSF certified for contact with water, with drinking water. So you have to deduce from there whether it's food safe or not. I do eat ice cream out of a bowl that I stabilized, and a while back I thought I was growing a third eye. It just ended up being a big pimple, so no. So you have to make that call. Other things you can do. If you want to pass that around, this is a friend of mine makes these. You can send the blank. You can send the blank around with it too. That is fabric. I think that may be blue jeans dyed in different colors. The way that's done is you soak it in resin. An easy way to do it, you get a couple 1x4s that are longer than what you want to do. Once you've soaked it sufficient, you lay down a layer of foil, start stacking up your fabric, put it in waves like he did if you want. Throw another layer of foil on top, another 1x4, clamp it all together super tight with a clamp, and then put some deck screws through it to hold it so you can take the clamps off and throw it in the oven and cure it. So, pardon? That's Ken Frisbee sells those blanks. Yeah, yeah. He makes and sells those in all kinds of different colors and patterns. Other stabilizing stuff, Banksia pods, pine cones. Of course, all your different woods are out there. I talked about rock. People have stabilized leather and stacked it to make K-bar knife handles. Basically, if it's porous and non-oily, it can be stabilized. I mentioned water meters. If you have a vehicle that has a cast iron engine block, it's been impregnated with a similar chemistry because cast iron's porous. So there's all kinds of different things it can be used for. So any other questions so I don't bore you any longer? Yes, sir.
Wall thickness of that chamber?
This is Schedule 40 PVC. So no, it's thicker than that. I don't remember the specs on it's in millimeters. It's more than a 1/4 inch. Yeah. I was a high-end custom home builder. And no, I'm not a chemist or a physicist or anything like that. I tell everybody my experience, as we're older, we all understand that little things you learn here sometimes can be building blocks for other things. I became a certified scuba diver at 15, which you deal with extreme pressures, changes in pressure. And I took my check ride for my private pilot's license at 17, which you deal with the other end of the spectrum. So between those two helped me understand the pressure differentials and that kind of stuff. So, pardon? Question is, have you used a vacuum oven? There would be no benefit for this because remember, vacuum pulled the air out. When we released vacuum, we introduced pressure that pushed the resin back in. If we then go and put it in a vacuum oven, we're now reducing pressure again. You'll tend to get more bleed out that way.
He is a chemist, that's why.
Okay. There is nothing with the stabilizing resin that I am familiar with that will boil off under vacuum. Oh yes, the question is put a trap between the pump and the chamber to keep the oil from backfilling. And yes, if you're in an area that has power, your power is not real reliable, it's well recommended to do. Okay, without getting too far into the weeds, I manufacture something to do that. Originally, it was the original version of stabilizing resin foamed up a lot. And if it foamed up too much, you could suck resin in and this would catch it before it got there. The formula was changed where it doesn't foam up anymore. So the only way it's going to get in there is if you're real negligent in what you're doing. So. Pardon? Let's talk about that later because, again, I don't want this to be even a semblance of being a sales pitch. So, because, I mean, mesquite can be done depending on the condition of the mesquite. Yeah. Yeah, the denser the wood, the longer the vacuum's going to take. For sure, because it's harder to get the air out of the material. So, any other questions? Yes, sir.
Check valve work as a trap?
These JB pumps have a check valve in them. They're not very reliable. They're supposed, pardon? Yeah. So, well, the check valve in this pump is actually right underneath here. And all it is a little ball that when it's sucking this way, when it's sucking this way, the ball is, I don't remember, whenever it's not, it pops back into place. But they're not very reliable. So, again, most of us probably don't have a lot of power outage problems. I mean, I don't know about where y'all are, but San Marcos, we have PEC and we have power go out maybe once a year for a short period of time. And the odds of me stabilizing at the same time the power goes out, it's not worth spending the money to buy the thing to go in between, in my opinion. So, any other questions? Y'all all experts now? As most people know, they're kind of crazy. So. Somebody is always at my shop between 9 and 4:30. Always. So. But any other questions? I appreciate y'all letting me come and teach you about stabilizing.